Welcome back. All right, so we are going to talk about the 1965-1966 season as we get closer to the league expanding. The original six era is coming to an end. The next season will be the last season of original six, and I'm going to need some smaller magnets for the standings. I may not need the 2x4 board, the 2 foot by 4 foot board, until we get to probably 1979-80. But we'll see. We'll see. I'll try to fit everything on the board. We'll see how it goes. Montreal ends up being the leading team in the NHL that year. They end up, as you can see, winning it all. What's interesting with Montreal that season is it's a really good season, but by Montreal standards, it's kind of just standard. They're 41-21-8 under Toe Blake, 90 points, 239 goals scored, 173 goals against, 23-11-1 at home, 18-10-7 away from home. So very good at home, very good on the road. Chicago Blackhawks are 8 points back with 82 points, 37-25-8 record, 240 goals scored, 187 goals against. Billy Ray is the coach still at that point for Chicago. They're 21-8-6 at home, 16-17-2 on the road. The Toronto Maple Leafs finished third with 79 points, a record of 34-25-11. 208 goals scored, 187 goals against, under coach Punch Imlach. He's still there. At home, 22-9-4 record, away from home, 12-16-7. The Detroit Red Wings, 31-27-12 overall for 74 points under coach Sid Abel. 221 goals scored, 194 goals against. At home, they're 28-7. On the road, 11-19-5. So rough time on the road for Detroit, but they're very good at home. And they make the playoffs because the two teams that miss the playoffs are horrible. Boston, 21-43-6, 48 points, 174 goals scored, 275 goals against. The good news being Bobby Orr's almost here. Milt Schmidt's still the coach. At home, they're 15-17-3, which is respectable. On the road, less respectable at 6-26-3. The Rangers, well, they finished 1 point back of Boston with 47 points, a record of 18-41-11. 195 goals scored, 261 goals against. So, goals against, really, really bad for Boston and the Rangers. The Rangers under the coaching of Emile Francis at that point. At home, they're 12-16-7. Away from home, they're 6-25-4. So, rough year for the Rangers. So, NBC jumps in. They're airing Saturday afternoon playoff games. And what's interesting is it's the first time that playoff games are aired in their entirety on a U.S. network. So CBS had aired games previously, but the NBC contract gives them Saturday afternoon playoff games. So the matinee game goes back to the 50s and 60s. February 9th of 1966, this is where it's announced where they're going to expand. Los Angeles, San Francisco. So it's the California Golden Seals, but San Francisco officially announced as the expansion city. St. Louis, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh are all granted conditional expansion franchises. Basically, as long as the check's clear, you're in. Vancouver was rejected as a potential, and so because there's only 2 Canadian teams, and now there's 6 more American teams, Canadians aren't very happy. And even the Prime Minister himself, Pearson, the president or Prime Minister at that point, Lester Pearson, he has some words for the NHL on the fact that they're not expanding to Vancouver. Vancouver, of course, would get a team in 1970. It is interesting, though, if the Canucks had become a team in 1967, how might things have been different? You don't have the Gilbert Perreault, Dale Talon thing. Who knows? But at any rate, Canadians not very happy with the fact that 6 new teams are coming in and they're all going to be American. Thankfully, Canada doesn't get mad about that stuff anymore. All right, teams have to suit up 2 goalies for every game. It had been previously mentioned for playoff games that the season before this one. Now it's for every game. Regular season, you have to have 2 goaltenders. The emergency backup goaltender had been a thing for quite some time at this stage, but they're like, no, you got to have your starter and your backup. The Bruins add Bernie Parent and Jerry Cheevers, so those are 2 goaltenders who are going to be pretty good. And the Rangers add Eddie Jockerman. So you've got yourself some pretty strong goaltenders coming into the NHL. March 16th of 1966, Toronto and Montreal combined for 4 goals in a minute and 5 seconds of a game which Montreal wins 7-2. So that's a lot of goals in a short period of time. April 3rd of 1966, Bobby Hull gets his 97th point of the season. That sets a new record for points in a season. That's where he ends. We're going to be into 100-point scorers soon, though. And then an interesting story here. So the Detroit Red Wings are in Montreal for a game against the Habs. Somebody breaks into Detroit stuff, steals all their jerseys. So Detroit has to get themselves new jerseys, and the fastest way to do so was actually from Hamilton's junior team. So they had an affiliation with Hamilton's junior team. They get those jerseys sent to them, and that's what they played in against the Montreal Canadiens rather than the Detroit Red Wings gear. So it'd be like if the Canucks had all their stuff stolen and they all wear Abbotsford jerseys instead. February 5th of 1966, Bill Gadsby becomes the first player to play 300 games for 3 different franchises. He does that with Detroit after previously playing 300 games with both Chicago and the New York Rangers. This would also be Gadsby's final National Hockey League season. March 12th of 1966, Bobby Hull gets his 51st goal of the season, so that passes Maurice Richard as Rocket Richard's records continue to fall. November 27th of 1965, Gordie Howe scores his 600th career goal. So, Gordie Howe continues to score goals. We know that he would eventually retire with 801. We're just not there yet. So the Hart Trophy goes to Bobby Hull of the Chicago Blackhawks, because of course it does. The Art Ross, Bobby Hull of the Chicago Blackhawks as well. The Calder Trophy goes to Britt Selby of the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Norris goes to Jacques Laperriere of the Montreal Canadiens. The Vezina is shared again. It's Gump Worsley and Charlie Hodge that share it there. And for the Lady Byng, that goes to Alex Delvecchio. Now, I don't have it on the board. Let me go ahead and cheat a little bit here and grab it for you. The Conn Smythe goes to Roger Crozier of the Detroit Red Wings. So even though Crozier doesn't win the Stanley Cup, he gets the Conn Smythe. So that's pretty strong endorsement for how well he played in those playoffs. Your All-Stars around the league that year, Stan Mikita's the first team All-Star in the middle. Jean Beliveau of the Montreal Canadiens, second team. On the right side, Gordie Howe is again the first team All-Star for the Detroit Red Wings. Gordie Howe, he's getting older, but he's not falling off at all offensively. Bobby Rousseau for Montreal is the second team All-Star. On the left side, Bobby Hull's the first team All-Star for the Hawks. Frank Mahovlich for Toronto is the second team All-Star. On the blue line, Jacques Laperriere of Montreal is first team All-Star alongside Pierre Pilote of the Chicago Blackhawks. And of course, Laperriere with the Norris and the first team All-Star nod. Alan Stanley of Toronto is on the second team alongside Pat Stapleton of the Chicago Blackhawks. In net, Chicago's Glenn Hall is the first team All-Star again. And Gump Worsley of Montreal is the second team All-Star. So Gump Worsley, after a bit of a rough start in Montreal, he does get it together, and he is a big part of a couple of Stanley Cup wins here. So Bobby Hull, as previously mentioned, does lead the league in scoring. 65 games, 54 goals, 43 assists for 97 points. He is way ahead of teammate Stan Mikita, who plays 68 games, 30 goals, 48 assists for 78 points. Bobby Rousseau of Montreal also gets 30 goals, 48 assists for 78 points, but he does it in 70 games, so 2 more games than Mikita. Jean Beliveau for Montreal again. Montreal, Detroit's under Montreal. For Montreal, 67 games, 29 goals, 48 assists, 77 points. So what happens when I start trying to read ahead a little bit? I just need to take a breath and keep going. Now for Detroit, Gordie Howe, 70 games, 29 goals, 46 assists, 75 points. Just insane numbers from Gordie Howe. So very consistent. Norm Ullman for Detroit, 70 games, 31 goals, 41 assists, 72 points. In net, Glenn Hall, 34, 22, and 8 record, 916 save percentage, 4 shutouts. All those numbers are good. Gump Worsley in Montreal, 28, 13, and 6 record, 917 save percentage, and 2 shutouts. Roger Crozier in Detroit, 27, 25, and 12, 904 save percentage, and 6 shutouts. And Johnny Bower in Toronto, 18, 10, and 5 record, 930 save percentage, 3 shutouts. So goaltending is still, ruling the day amongst the teams that are in the playoffs. And once we get to the playoffs, the semifinals, this year's playoffs go a little bit faster than the previous ones. We don't have a 7-game series at all. And so we get Chicago, Detroit, and Toronto, Montreal for the 4th year straight. Detroit loses in Chicago 2-1. They then destroy Chicago 7-0 in Chicago. Chicago goes into Detroit and wins 2-1. So even though they've been outscored badly overall in this series, they're ahead 2-1. However, the rest of the way, it's Detroit's series. They win 5-1 to tie the series at 2. They go into Chicago, they win 5-3, and then they win at home 3-2 to win the series in 6 games. Toronto and Montreal, this series does not go very long. Montreal wins both games at home by scores of 4-3 and 2-0. Then they go to Toronto. They win 5-2 and 2-1. They sweep the Toronto Maple Leafs. Again, Montreal, this isn't really a dominant season by their standards, and yet here they are in the final against a very game Detroit team. And again, for Chicago, a team that looks like they should be champions, they're just not getting there. Detroit beats Montreal in Montreal in the first 2 games by scores of 3-2 and 5-2, and Montreal takes that personally. They win both games in Detroit by scores of 4-2 and 2-1. They go home, they win 5-1 to go ahead 3-2, and then they win in Detroit 3-2 in overtime. So they win 4 in a row, including 3 in Detroit. They win the series 4-2, and they win yet another Stanley Cup for a Montreal franchise that is awash with Stanley Cups. It's a good thing they don't make a new Stanley Cup every year, because they would have run out of room in the Forum. Ullmark's the leading scorer, or Ullman. Ullmark, see, there you go. I would, you know what? I would normally say, you know what? I better start over, because that's a huge mistake putting Ullmark up there. But secondly, this is the 4th of these videos I've done today, so understandable there'd be a mistake on the board. Ullman for Detroit is the leading scorer, 12 games, 6 goals, 9 assists, 15 points. J.C. Tremblay for Montreal, 10 games, 2 goals, 9 assists, 11 points. Alex Delvecchio for the Wings, 12 games and 11 assists for him. In net, Worsley puts up a 1.99 goals against average in the playoffs. Roger Crozier a 2.34. So goaltending, very prominent, and overall very entertaining series. And next up, we'll get into the 66-67 season, the final of the original 6 era, and then things get really interesting. And I get the feeling view counts will start going up once we get into the expansion era, and people are able to track the teams that they've been following maybe for over 50 years. But I enjoy going through the year by year like this. Again, this is my 4th video of this nature today, as I'm trying to get far enough ahead that while we're on vacation, I don't have to worry about doing a history video looking at the year-by-year history of the NHL. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always as well. If you haven't already hit like and subscribe, please do. I will talk to you again soon.